We have signed the joint statement of the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China on deepening the comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation in the new era to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory in the Great Patriotic War and the people of China's victory over Japanese aggression.
We just witnessed the May 9th parade in Moscow, and a lot of things happened during this parade. A lot of world leaders went to Moscow. Some EU leaders went to Moscow against the wishes of the EU dictatorship.
Что в столь знаменательный день 80-летия Великой Победы вы с нами в Москве принимаете личное участие в торжественных юбилейных мероприятиях. Хотя знаю, что вас пытались отговаривать, да и проблемы определенные создавали, логистические, но тем не менее вы здесь с нами, и мы это высоко ценим. Это наш общий праздник. Наши воины плечом к плечу сражались с нацистскими захватчиками. Хорошо помню в этой связи наш с вами телефонный разговор 20 октября 1924 года по случаю 80-летия освобождения Белграда от немецко-фашистских захватчиков. Белградская наступательная операция советской армии совместно с подразделениями Народно-освободительной армии Югославии стала одним из ключевых событий завершающего этапа Второй мировой войны.
За ваш теплый прием, за ваше гостеприимство здесь. Еще раз поздравляю вас с праздником, с 80-й годовщиной победы в Великой Отечественной войне.
We had Slovakia's president or prime minister. We had
Господин председатель правительства, дорогие друзья, позвольте еще раз поприветствовать вас в Москве. Мы, безусловно, ценим ваше решение приехать на празднование 80-й годовщины победы в Великой Отечественной войне. Мы сейчас только с вами перекинулись несколькими словами. Знаю о сложностях, возникших с прилетом в Москву. Чинили такие препятствия логистические, но тем не менее вы здесь, и я думаю, что те, кто пытаются вас сдержать в каких-то ваших планах, лишний раз убедились, что лучше этого не делать. Все равно своей цели вы добиваетесь. Символично, что 10 лет назад, в 2015 году, вы также принимали участие в торжественных мероприятиях по случаю 70-летия Победы во Второй мировой войне. Мы благодарны руководству и гражданам Словакии за внимательное и бережное отношение к памятникам и захоронениям советских воинов, павших в боях с фашистскими захватчиками на словацкой земле. Знаю и о вашем предложении установить в Словакии памятник маршалу Коневу. Это очень благородное начинание.
Позвольте вам и вашим сотрудникам выразить благодарность за гостеприимство и заботу о нас во время нашего визита здесь, в Москве, в Российской Федерации. Господин президент, я хочу очень четко подчеркнуть, что Словацкое национальное восстание, которое состоялось в 1944 году, дает определенные приказы. А эти приказы обозначают, что наша страна должна быть противофашистской, должна отдать почет всем бойцам против фашизма и всем тем, которые освободили Чехословакию и всю Европу против гитлеровской Германии. Поэтому у меня не было никакой дилеммы. После того, как я получил приглашение на празднование 80-летия Дня Победы. Для меня это была честь, и я с удовольствием приняла это. Все технические проблемы, с которыми мы столкнулись, и что причинили наши коллеги из Евросоюза, будем считать детской шуткой. У нас было несколько вариантов, как попасть сюда, даже на машине через Беларусь. Еще одна альтернатива была через Калининград. Возможностей было много, но у нас была четкая цель. Утром в 9 часов мы должны быть в Москве. И это удалось, поэтому я очень рад.
This is all happening when the world is changing. There's a new world order, you could say, that's happening. China and Russia showed during this parade that they're committed to each other. They're gonna deepen their bilateral relationship, and Putin and Xi had a 7-hour meeting during which they discussed the relationship between Russia and China. 7 hours, guys. And after that meeting, they signed all kinds of trade deals where Chinese factories would be in Russia. Russia committed to finish building the second gas pipeline that would go to China, called the power or the strength of Siberia, which is a huge gas pipeline that will go to China, basically making sure China has all the energy that it needs to keep on growing, and Russia in return gets money and a chance to bypass all these ridiculous sanctions that the EU globalist feminists have put on Russia. And of course, we see there's the other side with the globalist feminist EU globalists in France, UK, Germany, with their new chancellor that was hardly elected, Merz. They're gathering in Kiev now to show solidarity with Zelensky.
This hour, the leaders of France, Germany, and the UK have arrived in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer are in Kyiv to discuss ceasefire plans with President Volodymyr Zelensky. They have been joined by Poland's leader Donald Tusk. The group wants Russia to agree to a full and unconditional 30-day truce to pave the way for lasting peace. It's the first time leaders of 4 European nations are on a joint visit to Ukraine.
Basically, they want to make sure that Ukraine is totally annihilated and destroyed. So they go to make sure they tell Zelensky, keep on fighting, buddy. You keep on fighting. You're our little fool. Actually, he's not a fool. He's their pawn that's gonna keep on protracting this war. But there's some interesting things that are happening with United States increasingly doing its own policy. It's increasingly being decoupled from EU and also from Israel, and it's becoming what you would say an independent state, because for years the US policy was dictated from EU and Israel. We're now seeing Trump is not talking to EU leaders, basically. He's talking to Putin regarding Ukraine. He's even talking to Putin regarding supplying gas to EU without talking to EU about it. That's how ridiculous things are getting. So EU is sidelined. It's really not important anymore. Trump is doing his own independent foreign policy, which he should. It's crazy for years how the US was hijacked by EU and Israel, and US couldn't do an independent foreign policy. it was either supposed to listen to EU globalists or to Netanyahu in Israel when it came to US foreign policy. Now we're seeing Trump increasingly move away from this ridiculous dependence on EU. He doesn't even care what the women in pants tell him from EU. He's greeting Putin and congratulating for World War II victory, and Putin congratulating him. He's trying to talk to Xi, and Trump understands increasingly that the main threat is coming from China, and he's trying to pull US out of these ridiculous conflicts against Russia, which is really not a threat to US. Russia is a capitalistic economy. It's open to do trade with US and supply US with trade with minerals, so it's really not a threat to US anymore. Iran is really not a threat to US either. The threat comes up when Russia, China, Iran, and all these countries hobble up together because of EU globalist ridiculous policies. So, and these policies push these countries to go to China's side, to side with China, and it makes China increasingly more powerful as the ridiculous EU globalist policies push Russia, China, Iran together. And also Israel is doing its part to push Iran with Russia. So I think Trump is trying to break this uh, thing that has been happening for years. He's doing a deal with the Palestinians in Gaza, which is good. He's not even talking to Netanyahu about it, and that's what we have reported now on Axis, that Hexat was supposed to go to Israel, but he's keeping Israel, and he's going with Trump to Saudi Arabia directly, where Trump will be having talks with the Saudis to have some type of agreement as far as nuclear energy goes. I think Trump wants to make sure that Saudi Arabia stays with the US, and Netanyahu doesn't like this because Saudi Arabia doesn't recognize Israel because of Palestine, and Saudi Arabia is saying that there needs to be a recognition of a Palestinian state for them to recognize Israel. So Trump is now directly talking with Iran, and Netanyahu is basically sitting in the sidelines, and we have Trump and US now having a ceasefire with the Houthis without the Israelis, and now increasingly Netanyahu is going against Trump. So we're seeing this break in the US policy with Israel. It could be temporary break, but it's happening because Trump is trying to operate independently from EU and Israel. And the same thing we're seeing in Ukraine, where the coalition of the losers, France, UK, Starmer with his really smart glasses, and Merz, another globalist liberal pawn, they're getting together in Kiev, and they're saying that they want to force Russia to come up and to come to a ceasefire with Ukraine. So sounds a bit ridiculous, where you're trying to force the winning side, the side that has over 6,000 nuclear weapons. You're trying to force that side to capitulate to little Zelensky, the comedian. This is how ridiculous things are in EU globalist dystopia. And Vucic confirmed that Serbia will stand with Russia. Slovakia confirmed that they will put a veto on any EU laws that will ban Russian energy. So they can't even Slovakia will veto any bill that EU Parliament brings in to completely ban Russian energy from EU, which is a complete suicide, to be honest, for EU. And he called Slovakia's president called the EU countries' actions that try to ban him from flying over their airspace to Russia childish games. This is how ridiculous things are getting in the EU globalist dystopia, as the EU globalist women in pants. Ursula von der Leyen doesn't even get a chance to talk to Trump anymore because she's just not as important, and Trump only talks to countries themselves in European Union. He really doesn't recognize European Union as an entity anymore. And increasingly Ukraine is becoming, Project Ukraine for Trump is becoming like Israel. EU doesn't matter anymore. Project Ukraine will be Project Ukraine. Trump will decide separately from EU what he's going to do as far as Project Ukraine goes. I think he's just going to cut a deal with Putin, to be honest, and he's going to cut a deal with Xi as well. We're seeing Brazil now, Egypt getting closer in BRICS with Russia, China, and Trump is trying to break this tendency where you have US on the side of EU losers, and on the other side you have basically the whole world. Trump realizes this is not a good arrangement. You can't be on a winning team now because EU is a losing team. They're losers. They're globalist, neoliberal losers. There are a whole bunch of women in pants. They don't even have a military. They're not going to have a military coming up for many years to even protect themselves, let alone they're now going with the coalition of the losers to Kiev to protect Zelensky. So things are getting ridiculous. Things are arranging globally, where US administration is heading its own independent foreign policy, which is good. We're seeing that in Israel, and we're seeing that in Project Ukraine, where United States is saying we're not going to basically be with the losers. We're going to be doing our own independent foreign policy. So what's in RT? In RT, Putin doing whatever possible for Ukraine peace, Kremlin. Ukraine forces attempted to breach border 4 times during Moscow Victory Day truce. And there's videos on RT. If you go to RT, there's videos how Ukrainian tanks try to breach the Kursk border and they get all blown up. Basically, suicide mission is happening for Ukraine troops right now as they try to. They're stupid. Basically, they're kamikazes for Ursula von der Leyen. That's what Ukraine troops are right now. They're basically suicidal mercenaries for Macron. I don't know why they're so stupid. I don't know. They're idiots. That's all I can call them. Whoever is listening to Ursula von der Leyen right now in Ukraine. And Kremlin declares that Vucic and Fico are heroes. Yeah, they're heroes because they disobeyed Ursula von der Leyen. Now she's going to punish them. I'm sure there is going to be some protests in both Serbia and Slovakia coming up. And what else do we have in the news? Putin and Trump exchange greetings. We talked about this already. EU state asks citizens not to celebrate World War II Victory Day. The Lithuanian Prime Minister has expressed concern that a small groups of people could state provocation. So, in Lithuania, celebrating the win over the Nazi Germany is a provocation. That's just fucking crazy. That's all I can say. And that's Lithuania for you. Same shit in Estonia and all these other shitty little Baltic countries that were built by the help of the Russian army, that were liberated by the help of the Russians. Of course, possibly the Estonians or Lithuanians and all these other little shitty countries wanted to live under the Nazi rule. Who knows? And Russia will continue to stand against Nazism, Russophobia, and anti-Semitism. Putin says, and anti-Semitism. This is important. And Zelensky, of course, he says Ukraine ready for immediate ceasefire. Bullshit. If you were ready, you wouldn't try to invade Kursk. And Putin, she talks lasted 7 hours. That's crazy. 7 hours. Russia and China are now in very deep bilateral agreements and partnership. And what else do we have in Politico? We have this new globalist pope that was elected. This pope, he's a globalist. He's a globalist pope. He has nothing to do with Christianity, real Christianity. Period. Let's not waste our time on that. And of course, Western leaders head to Kiev to demand Putin agrees to ceasefire. And we have the losers from France, UK, and Germany and Poland visit Ukraine on Saturday in an attempt to pile pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin to agree a 30-day ceasefire and open meaningful peace talks after 3 years of war. So they want to make sure Russia capitulates to their losers' demands. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Loser Macron, and Poland's PM Donald Tusk, and the new Chancellor of Germany, Merz, will be all in Ukraine capital to show their solidarity with President Volodymyr Zelensky. The optics of the display of European unity are critical. The leaders' visit to Kiev comes just a day after Putin hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping and dozens of other friendly leaders in Moscow for Russia's Victory Day parade. So, EU losers are increasingly left on their own to fight Russia. US cleverly is separating itself from the losers in EU because it's a losing game, and they're doing the right thing. Where EU now, Europe is on the table, it's lunch. That's what happens to losers when they try to bite too much. Why? Because EU is not really a geopolitical force like Russia, US or China even. Although Russia, you could argue, has more geopolitical power because it, for example, in India, it supplies India with weapons. So it has, even in India, such a big country, Russia has influence. EU, I would say maybe there's some trade agreements or whatever, but Russia has more hard power influence. So EU is now becoming lunch because of the losers in Brussels, and that's what happens when you sideline the big boys. The big boys in Washington, D.C. are telling you our policy is changing, you need to follow us. But the losers in EU, the women in pants, Ursula, Kaja Kallas are trying to force Trump to follow their own foreign policy. And the same thing is trying to do Netanyahu. They're trying to force Trump to follow their own foreign policy, like whatever is good for EU is good for US. Whatever is good for Netanyahu is good for US. And that's not the case. And we're seeing that right now with what's happening in Middle East, where Trump is basically decoupling from Israel. Hexet is not going to visit Israel. Trump is going to Middle East, but he's not going to visit Israel. He's visiting Saudi Arabia and having talks with the Arabian countries, but he's not visiting Israel. And he's also doing his own dealings with Hamas, and he's trying to take over and have US feed the population in Gaza that's basically starving right now. So we're seeing Netanyahu fighting the Houthis on his own now, where after US said that we're going to have our own ceasefire deal with the Houthis, while Netanyahu is basically going against the US and not following what the US is telling them to do. Same thing we're seeing in EU. And what's going to happen? EU is going to be a lunch. I bet you 100% the plan is to make sure that EU doesn't survive Russia. And because EU is, it doesn't work for US. US wants to deal separately with the European countries, to cut separate deals with Poland and Ukraine, and that's what's gonna happen. And Trump, I bet you, is gonna let Putin do the work, do the dirty work for him, and dismantle European Union. We're seeing already that in Romania with the Simon guy that's gonna be president. He's a Trumpist. He's a MAGA guy. He's a common sense guy. We're seeing the same common sense in Slovakia. We're seeing the same common sense in Belgrade, Serbia, although Serbia is not an EU member. So, but we're seeing common sense rise up. We're seeing common sense rise up against these EU globalist women feminists in pants. They're trying to destroy nations around the world.